I answered a childcare job ad in Belize that paid off my student loans. When I arrived, I found 12 other women from different countries living there. They weren't nannies. We were being harvested for a black market surrogacy ring. The only thing that saved us was the poisonous garden they let us tend for fresh air. Has anyone here ever answered a job ad that turned out to be something completely different? I was 24 when I flew to Belize for what I thought was a childcare position with a wealthy expat family. The posting had been perfect. Room and board, good pay, help with my student loans. They even sent a real plane ticket and had a driver waiting at the airport. The house was massive, hidden in the hills outside Belize City with gates that looked more like fortress walls. Mrs. Grimshaw met me at the door with the warmest smile, apologizing that the children were napping. She showed me to a beautiful room and said the other staff would help me settle in. That's when I met the first red flag. 12 other women lived in that house, all young, all from different countries. They smiled, but their eyes looked empty. Maria from Guatemala whispered that I should rest because tomorrow would be busy. When I asked about the children we'd be watching, she just shook her head. The next morning changed everything. Dr. Liu arrived with medical equipment and told me I needed a health screening for insurance purposes. Standard stuff, he said, drawing blood and asking about my medical history. Then he started asking about my cycle, my fertility, whether anyone would miss me if I stayed longer than planned. That's when Mrs. Grimshaw explained the real job. They ran a matching service for couples who couldn't have children. Not adoption, not regular surrogacy with contracts and lawyers. They found healthy young women who wouldn't be missed and made them disappear into their compound. The other women had been there for months, some for years, going through procedure after procedure. Your family thinks you're backpacking through Central America, Mrs. Grimshaw said calmly. We've been updating your social media, posting photos from different locations. They won't worry when you don't come home right away. My phone was gone. My passport was locked in their safe. The walls around the compound were 12 feet high with cameras everywhere. The other women told me fighting only made things worse. They'd learn to comply and wait for chances that never came. The medical procedures started that week. Hormone shots that made me sick. Constant monitoring by Dr. Liu. They assigned me to a couple in Japan who wanted specific physical features. Mrs. Grimshaw showed me their photo like I should be grateful for being chosen. She explained that I'd stay until successful, then remain through the full term. Some girls need multiple attempts, she said, but you're young and healthy. It shouldn't take long. The house ran on strict schedules, meals designed by nutritionists, exercise programs to keep us optimal, educational videos about prenatal care in different languages. They presented it all like we were providing a beautiful service while keeping us prisoners in paradise. Maria had been there the longest, 3 years, 4 successful pregnancies. She told me about girls who'd tried to escape. One made it to the road before guards brought her back. Another tried bribing a delivery driver. They all ended up relocated to an even more remote facility in the mountains. But Maria also told me about something else. The clients who visited, how some of them didn't know the truth about our situation. They'd been told we were willing participants in an exclusive program. A few had asked questions when they noticed things weren't right. One couple had even tried to help before Mrs. Grimshaw convinced them their surrogate was just homesick. I started paying attention to everything. Guard schedules, delivery times, which staff members seemed uncomfortable with the arrangement. Dr. Liu always looked away during exams, like he couldn't meet our eyes. The cook sometimes made extra food and left it where we could find it. Small rebellions that suggested not everyone was completely lost. 3 months in, everything changed when a new girl arrived. Yuki from Japan came in crying, begging to use a phone. She kept saying her father was a diplomat, that people would look for her, that this wasn't what she'd agreed to. Mrs. Grimshaw just smiled and had the guards take her to orientation. But Yuki said something that stuck with me. Her father knew she was coming to Belize. He had the flight information, the job posting. He'd be expecting weekly calls that would never come. For the first time in months, I felt hope. That night, Maria and I found Yuki sobbing in her room. She showed us her medical alert bracelet that the guards had missed. Severe allergic reaction to certain hormones, the exact ones Dr. Liu used in his procedures. If they gave her the standard treatment, she could die. They'll have to take me to a real hospital, she whispered. My father made me memorize the embassy number, if I can get to a phone, but Mrs. Grimshaw was too smart for that. When Dr. Liu discovered Yuki's condition, they simply marked her file as unsuitable and made plans to send her to work in their other business. The one they mentioned when girls couldn't get pregnant, the one no one came back from. We had 3 days before the transfer. 3 days to figure out how to use Yuki's diplomatic connection. Maria remembered that Dr. Liu kept a satellite phone in his medical bag for emergencies. If someone had a real medical crisis during Yuki's transfer, he'd have to use it. The plan was insane, but it was better than letting Yuki disappear. We had to create a medical emergency that looked real enough to force their hand. That's when I remembered the garden, the one they let us tend for fresh air. The plants Maria had warned me never to touch. The plants in that garden weren't just decorative. Maria had learned about them from the groundskeeper who'd quit months ago. Oleander could cause heart problems. Angel's trumpet induce hallucinations, but the dosages had to be precise. Too little and nothing would happen. Too much could cull someone. I spent the next morning in the garden, pretending to water flowers while studying the plants Maria had pointed out. The oleander grew thick along the eastern wall, its pink blooms deceptively beautiful. Angel's trumpet hung heavy from trellises near the greenhouse. My hands trembled as I worked, knowing Mrs. Grimshaw's cameras tracked every movement. During lunch, I watched Yuki push food around her plate. Her transfer was scheduled for dawn in 2 days. Maria sat across from us, her expression carefully neutral as guards patrolled the dining room. The other women ate in silence, some already showing signs of pregnancy, others still undergoing procedures. That afternoon brought an unexpected complication. Mrs. Grimshaw called me to her office, a space decorated with photos of happy families holding babies. She gestured for me to sit while reviewing papers on her desk. Her smile never wavered as she explained that my assigned couple had requested an accelerated timeline. They wanted results within 6 months, or they'd select another candidate. She showed me their latest message, praising my health screening results. The woman had even sent gifts, prenatal vitamins, and Japanese language learning materials. Mrs. Grimshaw presented these like treasures, explaining how invested the couple was in my success. The vitamins would start immediately. Dr. Liu would increase my hormone dosage. Everything would intensify. I nodded and thanked her, playing the compliant prisoner she expected. But inside, panic rose. An accelerated timeline meant less time to plan, less time to help Yuki. Mrs. Grimshaw dismissed me with with reminders about tomorrow's procedures, her eyes sharp despite the maternal smile. Back in my room, I found Maria waiting. She'd overheard guards discussing Yuki's transfer. The mountain facility was 3 hours away, accessible only by a single dirt road. Once there, girls entered a different kind of operation. Not surrogacy, but something darker that Maria couldn't fully explain. Women who went there were never seen again. We had to act fast. That evening, I volunteered for kitchen duty, something that pleased the staff since most women avoided extra work. The cook, a local woman named Rosa, supervised while I chopped vegetables. She hummed softly, occasionally glancing at the security cameras. When guards changed shifts, she stepped closer and pressed something into my palm, a small knife barely 3 inches long. Her eyes met mine briefly before she turned away. Another small rebellion. Another person who wasn't completely lost to this place. I slipped the knife into my waistband, hidden beneath loose clothing. It wasn't much, but it was something. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I lay awake calculating dosages, reviewing everything Maria had told me about the plants. The margin for error was terrifyingly small. Too obvious and Mrs. Grimshaw would see through our plan. Too subtle and nothing would happen. We needed something dramatic enough to require Dr. Liu's satellite phone, but not so severe it would actually call anyone. Morning arrived too quickly. Dr. Liu appeared for my increased hormone injection, his hands steady but his eyes still avoiding mine. The new dosage hit hard, nausea rolling through me in waves. He noted my reaction clinically, adjusting future doses based on my body's response. I wanted to grab his medical bag to search for the satellite phone, but guards stood just outside the examination room. After he left, I stumbled to the bathroom and vomited. The hormones were poison, each injection stealing more of my autonomy. Through the window, I could see the garden. Tomorrow was Yuki's last day. We had to act tonight. I spent the afternoon with Yuki, teaching her basic English phrases while secretly discussing our plan. She'd need to fake symptoms convincingly. Heart palpitations, difficulty breathing, confusion, classic signs of oleander poisoning that would force medical intervention. Maria would create a distraction during dinner, giving me time to harvest what we needed from the garden. I wonder what's really going through Rose's mind when she hands over that knife. That's quite a risk for someone who just works in the kitchen. There's something curious about how all these staff members seem to know what's happening but stay anyway. But Mrs. Grimshaw seemed to sense something. She appeared throughout the day, checking on various women, her presence a constant reminder of her control. During exercise hour, she walked among us, commenting on our form, our dedication to health. Her eyes lingered on Yuki, perhaps noting the girl's continued distress. Dinner approached with agonizing slowness. The dining room filled with the usual quiet desperation of women eating carefully planned meals. Maria sat near the kitchen door. I positioned myself where I could see the garden entrance. Yuki picked at her food, genuinely too nervous to eat. Then Maria moved. She stood suddenly, knocking over her water glass. The crash drew everyone's attention as she apologized profusely, dropping to clean the mess. Guards moved to help, their positions shifting. I slipped from my chair and headed for the bathroom, taking a detour through the garden door. The evening air hit my lungs as I moved quickly toward the oleander. Rose's knife cut through stems easily, and I stuffed leaves into my pockets. The angel's trumpet was harder to reach, requiring me to stand on a decorative rock. My hands shook as I worked, knowing cameras might catch me at any moment. A guard's voice called out. Someone had noticed my absence. I dropped from the rock and hurried back, shoving plant material deeper into my pockets. The bathroom excuse would only work if I returned quickly. My heart hammered as I slipped back inside, heading straight for the facilities. Minutes later, I emerged to find Mrs. Grimshaw waiting. Her smile was cold as she asked about my sudden bathroom need. I mumbled about the new hormones causing stomach problems. She studied me carefully, then suggested I rest. Dr. Liu could adjust the dosage if side effects were too severe. Back in my room, I transferred the plants to a pillowcase, hiding it beneath my mattress. Maria appeared after lights out, her face grave. She'd overheard guards discussing increased security for Yuki's transfer. They suspected the girl might try something desperate. We'd have one chance during the pre-dawn preparation. I showed Maria what I'd collected. Together, we crushed leaves into a paste, mixing carefully. The amount had to be perfect, enough to cause symptoms that demanded immediate medical attention, but not enough to cause permanent damage. We worked in darkness, guided only by moonlight through barred windows. By 3 in the morning, we were ready. The paste was divided into small portions, easier to administer quickly. Maria would distract the night guard while I reached Yuki. The girl would need to ingest it immediately, then wait for symptoms to manifest during transfer preparation. We moved through darkened hallways, avoiding cameras we'd mapped over months. The night guard sat at his station, fighting sleep. Maria approached him with complaints of insomnia, asking for warm milk from the kitchen. He grumbled but agreed to escort her, leaving his post momentarily unguarded. I slipped into Yuki's room to find her awake, dressed, and terrified. Her bags were already packed for transfer. I pressed the paste into her hands, explaining quickly. She had to take it all, had to trust us. Tears streamed down her face as she swallowed the bitter mixture. We had maybe 30 minutes before symptoms started. I helped her back into bed, telling her to act normally until she felt changes. Then she needed to sell the performance of her life. Heart racing, breathing problems, confusion. Enough drama to force Dr. Liu to use his emergency equipment. Maria returned, confirming the guard was back at his post. We retreated to our rooms to wait. Time crawled as I lay in bed, listening for any sign of commotion. The transfer team would arrive at 5. Yuki needed to time this perfectly. At 4:45, I heard movement in the hallway, guards preparing for the transfer. Then, exactly on schedule, Yuki's voice rose in panic. I pressed my ear to the door, hearing her gasps, her pleas for help. Guards shouted for Dr. Liu. Footsteps ran past my door. I cracked it open to see Dr. Liu rushing toward Yuki's room, medical bag in hand. This was our chance. Maria and I moved into the hallway, joining other women drawn by the commotion. We needed to be close when he used that satellite phone. Inside Yuki's room, chaos reigned. She writhed on the bed, clutching her chest, gasping for air. Her performance was flawless, selling every symptom we'd discussed. Dr. Liu checked her vitals, his face growing concerned. He ordered guards to give him space while he worked. Mrs. Grimshaw arrived, still in her nightgown, demanding explanations. Dr. Liu explained Yuki's symptoms suggested a severe reaction, possibly to something she'd ingested. He needed to contact emergency services immediately. The nearest hospital was hours away, but they could advise treatment over the phone. I held my breath as he reached for his medical bag. The satellite phone phone emerged, its antenna extending toward the ceiling. Mrs. Grimshaw watched with sharp eyes as he dialed, but instead of emergency services, Yuki suddenly lurched upward, grabbing for the phone. Her movement was desperate, unplanned. She knocked the phone from Dr. Liu's hands, and it skittered across the floor. Guards moved to restrain her, but she was already screaming numbers in Japanese. Her father's embassy contact, memorized and rehearsed. Mrs. Grimshaw's face transformed from concern to fury. She ordered guards to silence Yuki, to secure the phone, but other women pressed forward, blocking the doorway. We'd never discussed this part, but desperation created its own momentum. Bodies pushed against guards. Voices rose in multiple languages. In the chaos, I dove for the satellite phone. A guard's hand closed on my ankle, dragging me back. The phone spun away, grabbed by another woman who tried to dial before being tackled. It became a desperate game, the phone passing between hands as women fought for just seconds of connection. Dr. Liu stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sudden uprising. Mrs. Grimshaw screamed orders, but her perfect control was fracturing. Years of compliance had ended in minutes. The phone bounced off walls, was thrown between women, each trying to dial home before guards could stop them. Then Maria had it. She'd stayed calm while others fought, positioning herself perfectly. Her fingers flew over numbers as she backed toward the window. A guard lunged for her, but she'd already connected. In rapid Spanish, she screamed our location, the compound's name, pleading for help before the guard ripped the phone away. The room fell silent except for Yuki's continued gasping. Mrs. Grimshaw stood among the chaos, her face calculating. She ordered guards to secure all women immediately. Lockdown protocols engaged. No meals, no garden time, no movement until she sorted this out. As guards herded us back to rooms, I caught Dr. Liu's expression. He looked shaken, perhaps finally understanding what he'd been part of. The satellite phone was confiscated, but Maria's call had gone through. Someone, somewhere, had heard her desperately. Locked in my room, I listened to commotion throughout the compound. Vehicles arrived and departed. Voices argued in the main house. Yuki's transfer had been postponed while Mrs. Grimshaw dealt with our rebellion, but what would come next? Hours passed without food or water. The hormone withdrawal made me sick, adding to the oleander's lingering effects in my system. Through my window, I watched guards patrol with increased vigilance. The easy compliance of years had shattered in one desperate morning. By afternoon, Mrs. Grimshaw's voice echoed through speakers I hadn't known existed. She expressed disappointment in our behavior. Consequences would follow. Privileges would be revoked. The mountain facility had openings for those who couldn't appreciate the comfort of the main compound, but her threats felt different now. Desperate rather than controlled. Maria's call had changed something. We'd proven the compound wasn't impenetrable. Information had escaped these walls for the first time in years. That night, still locked in our rooms, I heard something new. Vehicles approaching from the main road, more than usual. Guards shouted to each other, their voices tense. Through my barred window, I glimpsed flashlights moving through the garden, searching. Then Rosa appeared at my door. The cook held keys I'd never seen before, her face urgent. She whispered that Maria's call had reached someone who cared. Local police were asking questions. Mrs. Grimshaw was stalling, but pressure was building. We needed to be ready. She unlocked my door and moved to the next room. One by one, women emerged into the hallway, not to escape. The guards would stop us, but to gather, to present a united front when authorities arrived, if they came, if Mrs. Grimshaw couldn't talk her way out. We assembled in the common room, 12 women from 8 countries, each carrying stories of deception and imprisonment. Yuki leaned against Maria, still weak but alive. The older women who'd been here longest stood straighter than I'd ever seen them. Years of submission were ending. Mrs. Grimshaw appeared with her usual smile, but it looked forced now. She tried to separate us, to speak privately with those she thought most compliant, but we stayed together, a silent wall of solidarity. Her offers of rewards for cooperation fell on deaf ears. The standoff continued through the night. Guards watched us while we watched them. Dr. Liu was notably absent, his medical bag abandoned in the corner. Outside, activity increased. More vehicles, more voices. The compound's isolation was breaking down. As dawn approached, exhaustion weighed on everyone. Some women dozed sitting up, afraid to return to their rooms. I fought to stay alert, knowing Mrs. Grimshaw would exploit any weakness. She paced the room, making phone calls in hushed tones, her perfect control finally cracking. Rosa coming through with the master keys is the plot twist nobody ordered but everyone needed. Turns out the real recipe for freedom was hidden in the kitchen all along. Then the main gate's alarm sounded. Not the usual delivery buzz, but something longer, more insistent. Guards scrambled to respond. Through windows, we saw official vehicles entering the compound. Not a raid, not yet, but authorities demanding answers. Mrs. Grimshaw's smile finally disappeared. She ordered us to our rooms to prepare for interviews. We were to say we were willing participants in a medical program. Any deviation would result in immediate transfer to the mountain facility. But her threats had lost their power. We refused to move. 12 women sitting in silent defiance while Mrs. Grimshaw's world crumbled. She could no longer maintain the fiction of a voluntary program with us united against her. The investigators would see through her lies. The door opened. Local police entered with a woman in professional clothes, someone from the Japanese embassy, drawn by Yuki's father's influence. They surveyed the room, taking in our appearance, our solidarity, the locked doors and barred windows. Questions began carefully. Mrs. Grimshaw tried to control the narrative, explaining our presence as a cultural misunderstanding. But Yuki spoke up, her voice stronger than expected. She told them about the false job posting, the confiscated passports, the forced medical procedures. One by one, others found their voices. Maria described 3 years of captivity. A girl from Thailand showed needle marks from constant hormone injections. I explained the social media deception, how our families thought we were traveling freely. Mrs. Grimshaw's explanations grew more desperate. She produced documents we'd supposedly signed, consent forms in languages we couldn't read. But the embassy woman wasn't fooled. She demanded to see our passports, our phones, our communication with families. The investigation expanded through the day. More officials arrived. Rooms were searched. The medical equipment in Dr. Liu's office raised immediate questions. Files revealed the couples who'd paid for our services, thinking they were part of a legitimate program. Dr. Liu was found in his quarters, packing to leave. Under questioning, his resolve crumbled. He admitted to the forced procedures, the lack of real consent, the women who'd been sent away when they couldn't conceive. His testimony destroyed Mrs. Grimshaw's remaining defenses. By evening, the compound was under full investigation. We were interviewed individually, our stories documented. Translators arrived for those who struggled with English. The embassy woman assured Yuki her father was coming, that she'd be home soon, but freedom felt surreal after months of captivity. We gathered in the garden, no longer prisoners, but not yet free. The plants that had helped save us grew innocently along the walls. Rosa brought us real food, not the controlled portions we'd known. Some women cried with relief, others sat in shocked silence. The Romanian girl who'd barely spoken in 6 months suddenly couldn't stop talking, words pouring out in her native language. We were processing trauma that would take years to fully understand. Mrs. Grimshaw was led away in restraints, her empire dismantled in a single day. She'd built her operation on isolation and control, never expecting a desperate phone call to break through. The guards who'd enabled her were also detained, their complicity under investigation. As night fell, arrangements began for our repatriation. Embassies were contacted, families notified. The couples who thought they were hiring surrogates would face their own reckonings. The mountain facility was raided, more women found in conditions we could only imagine. I sat with Maria and Yuki as stars appeared overhead. We'd survived by trusting each other when trust seemed impossible. The garden's dangerous plants had given us a weapon when we had nothing else. Small rebellions had added up to revolution. Officials promised we'd have our passports by morning. Flights home were being arranged. Medical care would address what the hormones had done to our bodies. Counseling would help with what captivity had done to our minds. The road ahead was long, but it led away from this place. That final night in the compound felt like a wake. We mourned the months and years stolen from us while celebrating the unexpected freedom. Women who'd been strangers became sisters through shared survival. Our captors had underestimated the power of desperate people working together. As dawn broke on our last day, buses arrived to take us to the capital. Real hotels awaited, then flights to countries we thought we might never see again. The compound would be evidence now, its high walls unable to hide the crimes committed within. I took nothing from my room except memories I wished I could leave behind. The fake life they'd created on my social media would be exposed. My family would learn the truth about my absence. The healing would be complicated, but at least it could begin. Standing at the gate, I looked back at the house that had been our prison. Mrs. Grimshaw's office windows reflected the morning sun, empty now of her calculating presence. The garden grew wild and untended, its dangerous beauty no longer hidden. Maria squeezed my hand as we boarded the bus. Yuki sat across from us, clutching a phone she'd been given to call her father. Other women filled seats, each carrying their own story of survival. We were leaving, but would never fully escape what happened here. The bus pulled away, taking us from captivity toward uncertain freedom. Through the window, I watched the compound disappear behind hills that had hidden so much suffering. Somewhere, other women might be answering job ads that promised adventure and delivered nightmare. Our story would be a warning. But in that moment, rolling toward the capital and the lives we'd reclaim, we were simply 12 women who'd refused to disappear, who'd found strength in solidarity when individual resistance failed, who'd turned plants in a garden into weapons of liberation. The compound faded from view, but its lessons remained. Trust could bloom in the darkest places. Rebellion could spark from the smallest gestures. And sometimes, the most dangerous thing in a prison wasn't the walls or the guards, but the moment when desperate people realized they had nothing left to lose. The compound faded from view, but our ordeal was far from over. At the first checkpoint outside the hills, our buses stopped abruptly. Armed men in civilian clothes surrounded the vehicles, their faces hard and unfamiliar. The embassy woman rose from her seat, her professional composure cracking as she recognized the lead figure stepping onto our bus. Mrs. Grimshaw's brother controlled the local transportation union. He'd been paid well to look the other way for years. Now his sister sat in custody, and his income stream had vanished. The official papers meant nothing to him. He ordered everyone off the buses while his men blocked the road behind us. The police escort was outnumbered 3 to 1. They kept their weapons holstered, trying to negotiate while we huddled together on the dusty roadside. The brother demanded compensation for lost business, claiming we owed him for the disruption to his operations. The embassy woman argued jurisdiction, waving documents that meant nothing to men with machetes. Maria grabbed my arm as more vehicles arrived from the compound's direction. Not official cars, but private trucks carrying the guards who'd been released on technicalities. They'd lost their jobs and wanted someone to blame. The circle of angry men tightened around our group. Then Rosa stepped forward from among the kitchen staff. She approached the brother with calm authority, reminding him of debts owed to her family. Her cousin ran the fuel depot his trucks depended on. Her uncle controlled produce distribution in 3 districts. The conversation was brief but effective. The brother's expression shifted from anger to calculation. Within minutes, his men were clearing the road. The guards from the compound found themselves surrounded by union drivers who suggested they find work elsewhere. Rosa returned to our group without explanation, but I saw the embassy woman slip her an envelope before we reboarded. The capital city overwhelmed our senses after months of controlled isolation. Traffic, noise, crowds of people moving freely. At the embassy district, we were separated by nationality. Yuki clung to Maria until officials gently pulled them apart. The promise of reunification felt hollow as friends were sorted into different buildings. My country's embassy was a fortress of glass and concrete. The staff seemed prepared for situations like ours, moving with practiced efficiency, medical exams, psychological evaluations, paperwork to verify identity. They'd already contacted my family, who thought I was somewhere in Peru based on the fake social media posts. The doctor examining me documented injection sites, took blood samples, noted the hormonal damage. She explained the treatments needed to restore my natural cycle, the time it would take for my body to recover. The psychologist asked gentle questions about my experience, making notes about trauma counseling resources back home, but freedom came with unexpected complications. My passport was evidence in an ongoing investigation. I couldn't leave until I'd given formal testimony. The embassy could provide temporary accommodation, but I'd need to stay in Belize for at least 2 more weeks. The thought of remaining in the country where I'd been imprisoned made my skin crawl. They gave me a phone to call home. My mother's voice broke when she heard me, cycling between relief and confusion. I couldn't explain everything, not yet. I told her there'd been a misunderstanding with my travel plans, that I'd be home soon. The lies felt necessary to protect her from the full truth. That night in the embassy guest quarters, I lay awake listening to city sounds through through bulletproof windows. Mrs. Grimshaw's brother controlling the transport union feels awfully convenient for someone who built an entire operation on isolation. Makes me wonder how deep these family connections run, and what other relatives might be protecting similar operations in these hills right now. Somewhere in this same city, Mrs. Grimshaw sat in a cell. Her network was being dismantled, but how many others operated similar compounds? How many women were still trapped in houses with high walls? The next morning brought lawyers and investigators. They needed detailed statements about recruitment methods, the couples who'd paid for services, the medical procedures. I spent hours in windowless rooms describing every detail I could remember. They showed me photos of other women, asking if I'd seen them. Some faces were familiar from stories Maria had told about girls who'd disappeared to the mountain facility. Between interviews, I met with embassy staff about repatriation logistics. My student loans had gone into default during my absence. My apartment was gone, possessions sold or discarded. The job I'd left to pursue adventure no longer existed. Freedom meant starting over with nothing but trauma and medical bills. A week into the process, complications arose. Mrs. Grimshaw's lawyer filed injunctions claiming we were willing participants seeking compensation through false accusations. He produced contracts with signatures that looked like ours, video testimonials we didn't remember making. The substances they'd given us had gaps we couldn't fill. The other women faced similar challenges. Maria learned that her family had been told she'd died 2 years ago. They'd held a funeral, mourned her loss. How could she return to a life that had already ended? The Romanian girl discovered her visa had expired during captivity. She faced deportation proceedings despite being a victim. We gathered when possible in the embassy cafeteria, sharing information and comfort. Some women had already been flown home, disappearing into lives we couldn't imagine. Others remained stuck in legal limbo. Yuki's father had arrived, a stern man who seemed more concerned with minimizing scandal than comforting his daughter. Dr. Liu's testimony proved crucial, but came with a price. In exchange for cooperation, he'd receive a reduced sentence. The man who'd injected us with hormones, who'd monitored our bodies like livestock, would serve maybe 2 years. The couples who'd paid for babies faced no charges, classified as victims of fraud rather than conspirators in trafficking. My testimony took 3 days to complete. Every detail scrutinized, every timeline verified. They asked about the plants in the garden, the knife Rosa had given me, the exact words Mrs. Grimshaw had used. The prosecutor warned that the defense would attack my credibility, claim I'd volunteered for surrogacy, then changed my mind. Finally, after 2 weeks of bureaucracy and investigation, I received clearance to leave. A commercial flight home, economy class, paid for by emergency repatriation funds I'd have to repay. At the airport, I saw 2 other women from the compound. We nodded but didn't speak, each lost in our own journey toward whatever came next. The plane lifted off from Belizean soil, and I pressed my face to the window, watching the country shrink below. Somewhere down there, the compound still stood empty, its garden growing wild. Other houses probably operated the same way, hidden in hills, filled with women who'd answered ads for adventure. Immigration at home was a blur of stamps and questions. My parents waited beyond security, looking older than I remembered. My mother cried while my father stood stiffly, unsure how to process his daughter's return from the dead. The drive home was silent except for my mother's occasional sobs. My childhood bedroom had become a storage space, boxes of Christmas decorations, old tax documents, the detritus of lives that had continued without me. My parents had prepared a bed, bought new clothes in sizes they'd guessed. Everything felt like a costume for a person I no longer was. The first night home, I woke screaming from dreams of needles and locked doors. My mother found me in the bathroom, scrubbing my skin raw. She held me while I sobbed, not asking questions she wasn't ready to hear answered. My father made tea and stood in the doorway, helpless in the face of trauma he couldn't fix. Days blended together in a haze of medical appointments and therapy sessions. The hormones had damaged more than just my cycle. Bone density issues, metabolic changes, complications that would require years of treatment. Insurance classified it as elective medical care, refusing coverage. The bills accumulated faster than I could process. My old friends had moved on, building careers and relationships while I'd been gone. They tried to understand, but how could I explain? Social media showed their engagements, promotions, normal life milestones. I'd aged out of my peer group, carrying experiences that set me apart. The prosecutor called occasionally with updates. Mrs. Grimshaw's trial would take months to begin. Other women had already recanted testimony, pressured by threats or exhaustion. The defense team was well-funded, connected, prepared to destroy our credibility. Justice felt as distant as the compound felt near. 3 months after returning home, I got a message from Maria. She'd made it back to Guatemala but struggled to reconnect with family who'd grieved her death. She was working in a textile factory, sending money to siblings who barely remembered her. We video called sometimes, 2 survivors checking that the other still existed. Yuki wrote once, a formal letter saying her father had arranged for her to study in Switzerland. She thanked me for helping save her life, but asked that I not contact her again. Her family needed to move forward without reminders of shame. I understood, but it still hurt. The therapy helped slowly. Learning to sleep without checking locks, eating without calculating nutritional optimization, trusting my body's signals after months of external control. Some days were harder than others. Triggers could be anything from medical offices to garden centers. 6 months after escape, I started working part-time at a local library. Quiet work that didn't require explanations for resume gaps. My supervisor was kind, never asking why I sometimes flinched at unexpected touches or needed breaks when anxiety struck. Small steps towards something resembling normal life. The trial began 8 months after our escape. I flew back to testify, expenses covered by victim advocacy groups. Seeing Mrs. Grimshaw in court was harder than expected. She looked smaller, older, but her eyes held the same calculating coldness. Her lawyers portrayed her as a misguided entrepreneur providing legitimate services. My testimony lasted 2 days. Every word challenged, every detail questioned. They suggested I'd volunteered for surrogacy, then regretted it. They presented fake social media posts as evidence of my willing participation. They twisted trauma into inconsistency, survival into suspicious behavior. Other women testified too, each facing the same attacks. Maria flew in from Guatemala, Rosa from wherever she'd disappeared to. We sat together during breaks, holding hands through character assassination. The defense painted us as opportunists seeking payouts, not victims seeking justice. Dr. Liu testified for the prosecution, detailing medical procedures and admitting his complicity, but his plea deal undermined our credibility. Why believe victims when the perpetrator got leniency? The jury seemed skeptical, influenced by expensive experts who explained away our experiences. After a month of testimony and arguments, the jury deliberated for 3 days. We waited in a hotel, afraid to hope. When the verdict came, it was mixed. Guilty on some charges, not guilty on others. Mrs. Grimshaw received 7 years, eligible for parole in 4. The compound would be sold, proceeds going to victim restitution that might cover a fraction of our medical bills. 7 years for stealing years from dozens of women. 4 with good behavior. She'd be free before some of us finished paying for therapy. The prosecutor called it a victory, but it felt hollow. Justice had been served in the smallest possible portions. I flew home the next day, returning to my library job and weekly therapy. Life continued in its strange new rhythm. Some days I forgot to be grateful for freedom. Other days, gratitude was all that kept me moving. The compound was closed, but its effects rippled outward through every survivor trying to rebuild. A year after escape, I received a final letter from the prosecutor. Mrs. Grimshaw's appeal had been denied. The mountain facility investigation had resulted in more arrests. 37 women had been freed from various locations, each carrying their own version of our story. Small victories in an enormous problem. I kept the letter, but didn't respond. My focus had shifted from justice to healing. Trauma would always be part of my story, but it didn't have to be the only part. Slowly, carefully, I was building something new. Not the life I'd planned before Belize, but something harder earned and more precious. The nightmares faded gradually. Therapy helped process what talk couldn't fix. I started dating eventually, learning to trust again in small increments. Work expanded from part-time to full. Normalcy crept in around the edges of trauma, filling spaces I'd thought permanently broken. 2 years after escape, Maria messaged that she was getting married. A man from her factory who knew her story and loved her anyway. She sent photos of a simple ceremony, her smile genuine for the first time since I'd known her. Hope could grow in the most damaged ground. I thought about the compound less frequently. Months could pass without remembering the weight of locked doors. Then something would trigger a memory, and I'd be back in that garden, calculating dosages of oleander. But the memories had less power now, processed into something manageable. My parents learned to stop asking when I'd be over it. Trauma didn't work that way. It integrated slowly, becoming part of a larger story. I was more than what happened to me, but I was also forever changed by it. Both truths existed simultaneously. 3 years after escape, I heard Mrs. Grimshaw had been released early. Good behavior and prison overcrowding. She'd served less than 3 years for stealing dozens of lives. The news hit harder than expected, bringing back anger I'd thought processed. Justice remained an incomplete concept, but I had work the next morning, dinner plans that evening, a life that continued despite her freedom. The best revenge was building something she'd tried to steal, a future of my own choosing. It wasn't the future I'd imagined at 24, but it was mine. The compound had been demolished. I learned from another survivor's message. Developers bought the land for resort construction. Soon tourists would sunbathe where we'd been prisoners, never knowing the ground's history. Memory could be paved over but not erased. I marked the anniversary of escape quietly each year. Not a celebration exactly, but an acknowledgement. I'd survived something designed to erase me. That was worth remembering even as I moved forward. The other women marked it too. Messages arriving from around the world. Still here, still fighting, still free. Life settled into patterns that felt increasingly normal. Work, relationships, small pleasures that had once seemed impossible. I learned to garden again, growing herbs on my apartment balcony. No oleander, no angel's trumpet, just basil and mint and peaceful things. Recovery wasn't a destination, but a journey that continued daily. Some days were harder than others. Triggers could surprise me years later, but I had tools now, support systems, ways to navigate trauma without drowning. The compound had taken much, but not everything. This whole ending feels very neat and tidy for such a messy situation. See you all in the next video.